Hi everyone. This is a video meant to go over some of the key concepts that you're going to need to know in order to complete your AP Computer Science summer assignment. And especially being able to complete the Coding That warm-up assignment. So we're going to start by just making our first method. So a method is like a function that does something. So it takes in a value and then it does something with that value and then returns a value. So in this case, don't worry too much about the first two words, public and static. That's going to be something that you'll learn about later on in the course. Boolean is meant to represent either a value of true or false. So it can either be one or the other. And those are the only two values that it can be, either true or false. So what that's telling us is that this method is going to return only a value of either true or false. So that's the only thing it's going to spit out in the end. Then old enough is going to be the name of your method or function. So a method in Java, again, does something. It's like a verb. So old enough is going to check if somebody is old enough to drive. And then methods take parameters or arguments. So this method takes a parameter of an integer, and the integer parameter, we're giving it the variable name age. And what that's doing is it's going to take a certain age as an argument, and we're going to check to see if that person is able to drive or not, depending on their age. So after the method is shown here, then you're going to start the body of the method, so what goes inside the method, with curly brackets. So here, if I just said something like return true, something like that, right? And I ran this. So if I ran this, then there's some other things at the bottom of the code that help with checking, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Old enough, if I give it a parameter of 10, it's going to tell me true. If I give it a parameter of 19, it's going to tell me true. And if I give it a parameter of 17, so if I say that your age is 10, 19, or 17, they're all going to give me the value of true. So that's shown over here in your terminal. Now, we don't want that to happen because we don't want 10-year-olds to be driving. So in this case, we're going to have to add some conditions here. So in order to do that, you're going to use an if statement. So you would write lowercase if, space, and then you're going to open parentheses. So the condition that needs to be met is going to go inside these parentheses. So what do we want to be true? Well, we want the age to be greater than or equal to 17, right? That's the only way that you can have your license. Well, at least in New Jersey, right? You have to be older than 16 or greater than or equal to 17. So after that condition, so after that goes in your set of parentheses, you need a set of curly brackets. So it's an open curly bracket here, and then you're going to hit enter, and then another close curly bracket. So within those curly brackets, I'm going to return the value of true. Okay, so now if I go to run this, the compiler over here is going to yell at me. It's going to tell me that I have an error here because every method that is saying that it's supposed to return a Boolean value needs to return a value, either true or false. So notice that if your age is not greater than or equal to 17, it doesn't return anything. So we also have to write an else statement. So we'd also have to say else anything else. So you're going to use curly brackets here, and you would say return false. Okay, false is your other Boolean value. And here you don't have to put parentheses after the else because else is just going to happen anything else. So anything else, you're going to return false. So let's try and run that now. Okay, so here, old enough with an argument of 10 returns false, old enough with an argument of 19 returns true, and old enough with an argument of 17 returns true, and that is what we want. Okay, so the next method that we're going to be looking at is called isTeen, and this method is going to check to see if a certain person's age is a teenager, so if that person's a teenager. Now, this is a little bit more complicated than the last method, because in this case, it's going to have a minimum value and a maximum value, right? So you stop being a teenager after age 19. Public static is still the same as last time. We don't really care much about it right now. Boolean just means that it's going to return either true or false. So that is the return value. Teen is the name of the method. And then we have int and age. So age is an argument or parameter of a method. So in Java, a lot of times we call it a parameter. In other languages, you'll call it arguments more often, but either is fine. So, okay, so let's first start by, we know we're going to need a conditional statement. So in this case, you have to be a teenager if your age is greater than or equal to 13, right? If you're greater than or equal to 13, then you're going to say return true. Okay, and then we can say else, return false. And this is going to run perfectly fine, but it's not always going to give us the desired output. You notice that we're saying a 10-year-old is not a teen, a 19-year-old is a teen, a 17-year-old is a teen, but we're also saying that a 35-year-old is a teenager, which is definitely not true. And that's because we haven't checked the other side of this, right? We've only checked to see if age is greater than or equal to 13. So we also need this. We need age has to be not only greater than or equal to 13, but it also has to be age is less than or equal to 19. Now, in some other languages, you would just write out the word and, but in Java, the and would be double ampersand signed. So this right here tells you that you need not only age to be greater than or equal to 13, but you also need age to be less than or equal to 19. So let's try running this now. So now it gives us false for 10, true for 19, true for 17, and false for 35. So that looks like it's running correctly. Now, one thing that is true in math but is not true in code is you wouldn't be able to take this and write something like this. 13 less than or equal to age, which is less than or equal to 19. You could not do something like this. And that is because Java is only going to look at the first part. It doesn't understand that like shorthand of writing it. You have to specifically say an age has to be greater than something and less than something else. So you have to mention age both times there with the double ampersand sign in between. So that's an example of an and inequality. Now, what happens if you wanted to write something that was, instead of is teen, you wanted to write something like is not teen? So in this case, if you wanted to say something like is not teen, then you'd want to say age would have to be less than 13, or you'd have to say age is greater than 19. So instead of the double ampersand sign, you would write or, which is these two straight lines. They're called pipes, and that's right above the backslash. So shift backslash, and that's the symbol for or. So it would be age is less than 13 or age is greater than 19, and that would show you anyone that is not a teen. But that's not the case for this code, so let's go back to the original. But that's an example of an or inequality. So the next method that we're going to look at not only returns a Boolean value, but it is also taking one Boolean value as its parameter. So in this case, it's going to return true or false. Test is the name of the method. And it's also going to take a variable. The name of the variable is A, and it's of type Boolean. So what that means is that you're going to input either true or false when you're calling this method. So we want this method to print out, if A is true, we want it to say, we want it to return true. And if A is false, we want it to return false. You can say something like this. If A, and A is just going to be a value that's true or false, equals true. So equals is the operator that checks for equality. So it's not assigning A equal to something, it is checking. Is A true? It's asking Java that. So if A is true, we want to return true. Else, we want to return false. So all this is doing is returning true if it's true and false if it's false. So notice here we tested, and in the case of true, it returns true. In the case of false, it returns false. Now, something is going on here that's a little bit special in this case though, and that's because if your test case is a Boolean and your return case is a Boolean, then you can shorten this up. So you don't actually need to write all of this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete it all. And instead of writing if A equals true, I'm just going to say return A. So what this does is it just returns the specific value for A. And A is a Boolean value already. So I can just return the value of A. And if A is true, it returns the value of A, which is true. If A is false, it returns the value of A, which is false. Now, say I wanted the test case to not return the exact value of A. Say I wanted it to return the opposite value of A. So if A is true, I'd want it to return false, right? So say it's like an inverse relationship. Then what you could do instead is you could just put an exclamation point right in front of A. So what that means, what the exclamation point in front of A means is not A. So if A is true, then not true would be false. If A is false, then not false would be true. So not true gives you false, not false gives you true. So again, this exclamation point just inverts it, okay? Now, you could have also made a really, really long example, right? So you could have gone back to here, and instead of saying if A is equal to true, you could say something like exclamation point equal to true. So what this does is it does the same thing that we just talked about. You're saying if A is not equal to true. So right here, A is not equal to true would cause true to get you false and false to get you true. But the shorter way would just be to go back to the original way, which was just return not A. So in the next example, it gets a little bit more tricky because now we're taking two Boolean arguments. So our first argument or parameter is Boolean A, and the next one is Boolean B. And this is again going to return a Boolean value, so true or false. And the goal of test 2, this method, is we want it to return true if A or B is true, but not both. So both can't be true, but one can be true or the other can be true. So we need to write some kind of conditional statement here. Now, notice this // here. That's just called a Java comment. So this is a single line comment, which means that the compiler does not read this at all. It's kind of like just there for our reference, but nothing else. So after the comment, I'm going to type something like if. All right, so we want to see, is A or B true, right? So we want to say something like if A equals true, I'm going to do it the long way for now, and then we'll go back and do it the shorter way. If A is equal to true or B is equal to true, then I want to return true. And then I'm going to say else return false. So this is not going to be exactly correct, but we're just going to see what it gives us. So when I run it, If both are true, it returns true. If one's false and one's true, it returns true. If one is true and one's false, it returns true. And the only time it returns false is if both are false. So let's see why that's happening. So if you have A equals true or B equals true, what that's saying is that only one has to be true. So if they're both true, it'll work. If one of them is true, it'll work. Or just means that one of them has to happen. So for instance, if you said, are you a boy or a girl, right? Then if you're a boy, you would say yes, because you are one of those things, right? So or is not very specific because either one or the other could be true or both. Now, in this case, we don't want that, right? We don't want both to be able to be true. So not only do we want to say A equals true or B equals true, but we also want to, within this if statement, I'm going to put another set of parentheses around A equals true and B equals true. And I'm going to then, after that, I also want something else to happen. I also want A and B to not both be true. So not only do I want A or B to be true, I also want A and B to not both be true. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to say, okay, well, if A equals true and B equals true, then this is bad, right? So I'm going to put a not sign in front of this. So the exclamation point negates this whole thing. So if this whole thing doesn't happen, so we want this to be false, we want this to not work, but we want the stuff to the left to work. So we want this to be no and this to be yes. We want either or to be true, but we want both to not be both true. So we want or to be yes, but and to be no. So the reason I'm putting parentheses around each of these conditions is because this is a single compound conditional here, and then over here, this is another single compound conditional here, and then we're putting those two things together with ampersand signs. So now let's run it. And here, two trues give you a false, false true gives you a true, true false gives you a true, and false false gives you false. And that's exactly the output that we wanted here. So hopefully this helps you when you're doing some of the coding bat warm-up problems, because a lot of those coding bat warm-ups are similar to these types of problems that we just went over.